Welcome to the second day of the conference, and we are here to discuss the fourth industrial revolution and supply chains. First of all, probably we would like to learn more about your background. How did you end up with being involved with supply chains?
Yeah, so my background is very technical. I didn't always do blockchain, so before I did typical tech startups, tech consultancy, and other topics. But since a couple of years ago, blockchain started really resonating to me. The possibilities, the totally disruptive architectures that can enable such improvements in the processes, even new business models. Lately, and to your question, why supply chain specifically? I guess it's market forces and it's a matter of timing. So the first adopters of blockchain were mostly the financial institutions, because Bitcoin was really, tackling their core business, so they had to move. Then they lost a little bit the steam on that. And now what I see is that companies that have complex supply chains and that have a lot of vendors, a lot of complexity, different ERP systems, a lot of data fragmentation. What they are seeing in blockchain is that it is actually a very good technology to create massive improvements to this existing infrastructure. They can create token economies that create incentives for distrusting parties like vendor supplier and kind of these kind of relationships to come together in a way that they can cooperate, they can have more efficient transactions, and they can even enable new business models based on data that is collected and stored on the blockchain or based on some blockchain architecture that keeps trust and accountability on handling that data. So to your question, is mostly market forces, but it's actually something that I'm deeply passionate about, is bringing this efficiency and mostly enabling new levels of trust that can only be brought by blockchain.
I suppose that the context is very right. Like that's the moment when we are shifting towards this fourth industrial revolution with the whole automation process, autonomous systems, and emerging technologies, right? Which is fueled by digital data. There are a huge amount of data. So what do you think is the strongest points, the strongest qualities of blockchain-based systems or solutions, how they work with data, what do they do with data, so how they can benefit our work with data?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Data is really the driving force here. It's like people call it the 21st century version of oil. It's really a powerful asset, and most businesses don't really know how to leverage it to bring business value to them. And with data comes ownership and protection and security and accountability for if something goes wrong with that data. So, of course, having these massive amounts of data and wanting to do something with it fuels the adoption of enabling technologies like blockchain, which you can put as a layer on top of these IoT devices or sensors that collect vast amounts of data, and create the right incentives for the parties, the right, for example, revenue splits or whatever, the right accountability mechanisms if something goes wrong, who is the owner of this data piece, or who is the owner of the asset, who is accountable for compensating for whatever has gone wrong. So absolutely, blockchain is enabling these new models. It's being rolled out slowly in the enterprise, but is actually being rolled out much faster in more disruptive scenarios, like for example, carbon footprint, even scenarios where there is little existing infrastructure, for example, in developing countries, electric grids. So blockchain is really pushing that forward, and all those problems are kind of their own flavor of supply chain.
Do you think like that the reason for the slow adoption was that the focus was too big on blockchain solutions? So we need to do something with blockchain, let's attach it here, let's run everything on blockchain, and then it just turned out it doesn't work this way. As you mentioned, it's just one of the layers of the infrastructure, right? So do you think that now that there are more platform solutions, yeah, where blockchain is just one of the elements, the adoption can like speed up?
Absolutely. I think what happened is that there was a lot of noise around cryptocurrency, which had some bad aspects to it, like scams, money laundering, people getting screwed in multiple ways, people getting rich by not creating value to society, which is unfair. So that was the bad part. But obviously the good part is that this created a lot of noise that brought awareness to the community, to companies, to entrepreneurs, to investors. And actually being here in such an event is a very good signal of that. There is awareness for people to subscribe to events, to make things happen, and to further discuss the possibilities of creating value. So it's really important to highlight that right now we are post this noise phase. Is actually good for the value creators in this space, that prices are going down, so the noise is kind of calming down a bit. And now you see much more concise propositions. It's not anymore like the board who heard about blockchain and goes top down and says, hey, Mr. CTO, do something with blockchain because my shareholders just demand it because everyone seems to be doing it. And the CTO would just go, yeah, why not? I have the budget, let me just do whatever proof of concept I can come up with. Didn't make a lot of sense in terms of value creation, but that was not the point. So it actually achieved the point, which was just awareness and labeling company X with blockchain, because that mattered in the noise days. Nowadays, companies are a step ahead of that. So it's not just do anything with blockchain, because that's what matters. Is back to the normal day-to-day business, which is solve business problems. And blockchain is a very good solution. So what I see in companies is that blockchain developments are less and less like standalone, sterile solutions that don't create a lot of value but are very low risk. So what they used to do some time ago. What I see now is that they are going a step forward and integrating it through the supply chain, or even trying to come up with industry-wide consortiums, or even companies who have or holding companies that have a very complex internal infrastructure, rolling out things that actually make sense, although they are internally to the group. So yeah, again, goes back to supply chains, and blockchain alone should not be a solution finding a problem. There are business problems already enough so that we can focus on that and use blockchain, of course, combined with sensors, IoT, data collection mechanisms, and then as blockchain creates this layer that can bring distrusting parties together, normalize data, and serve it, we can run like the typical machine learning and AI models that used to be run just on like one singleton company because the data was there on the database. It can be run kind of industry-wide or supply chain-wide, so the value creation can go a step further. And it's not just blockchain. Blockchain is just a piece of the puzzle.
As an example, again, if you come back to supply chains, for example, we have a task to optimize our logistics and supply chains. For example, with structuring our manufacturing capacities. So what could be like a case for that? So of course it increases traceability, right? And it's easier to adjust the system, but how can it work like technically?
Yeah, so actually that's kind of my job these days. A lot of companies come to us with this kind of problems. Just to outline a few, at Tech HQ we're dealing with a big logistics company to solve a problem that causes 15% of budget waste every year on lost containers because they cannot keep track of it. Of course, blockchain brings traceability, but then you ask, but why haven't they solved it before? Why blockchain? Because there's a lot of parties, and parties will not share data with each other because sometimes they are competitors. So I will not share data with you if you are competing with me, because that's my trade secret. So creating a protocol that has transparency and accountability, but also the right level of encryption and security is enabled by blockchain to solve this specific problem. The same thing we're doing with a big pharma company. They told us, look, I have no clue if some drug is going out of stock in somewhere. And I go like, really? This is 2018. I'm surprised. And why is that? And then as we go down, it's not one company. It's a product of a lot of mergers and acquisition activity over time as they grew. So systems, ERP systems, all the data is very fragmented across very different things. And if you again ask why blockchain, it's really to bring these distressing parties together, because some of them belong to the same group, but of course there are politics and different incentive structures. Then there are competitors also doing business together for distribution and whatnot. So what I'm seeing in the marketplace, in the supply chain logistics field, is that a lot of problems have been around for a long time because they imply bringing competitors together. And that's something that hasn't happened because they don't feel safe. Although they might have the business agreements with a lot of penalties, it's difficult to track because typical centralized systems require someone to be the owner, and people need to trust the owner. And they are not necessarily transparent, and they don't have the right level of accountability. So blockchain is actually pushing forward these kind of use cases. So when back to the topic of this fireside chat, rolling out Industry 4.0 across supply chains with blockchain as an enabler, is really that what I mean is this level of transparency and accountability can enable like this next step that companies and industries haven't taken before because this wasn't a thing.
Are we talking about private or public blockchains used for supply chains?
It's typically a consortium. So typically public blockchains are not really feasible because data these parties say should not be fully public. It should be public within the consortium because there are business agreements behind. And also it doesn't need to. The transparency needs to come consortium-wide. They are not public, fully private, because a blockchain fully private, it's not that much different from a centralized database. It belongs to one party, so it's basically the same principle. But it's not fully public either, so it's a consortium, it's somewhere in the middle.
So for example, when you work with your clients, so do you recommend to use some blockchain, or do you just build it from scratches and then integrate an IT system? So what blockchain do you use?
I honestly, I don't carry a flag of any blockchain implementation. I think the whole space is actually very early still, so there is no clear winner, and also different problems demand for different solutions sometimes. My background when I came into the space, I was very much Ethereum, public ledger Ethereum. As I started, and in the ICO craze, it was mostly Ethereum, some Stellar, but mostly really Ethereum as the standard that emerged. Going to enterprise and consortium blockchains, I still do a lot of Ethereum, mostly the consortium possibilities and private ledgers built on top of the core Ethereum stack, Quorum, Parity, these kind of things. Of course, as you would expect, there's a lot of IBM Hyperledger involved, of course, and also some other things. Again, I like experimenting, and there is no clear winner. So there's actually a huge incentive for me to try new things, new ledgers, because it's just a very experimentational phase. Although some of the ledgers are already mature enough to roll out production level products.
Again, if you come back to cases, and you mentioned IBM, and they have quite a lot of things happening there. They have trade lens solution. So I guess in a way they are kind of working now already made solutions that they could just, imply and then multiply and use it across different clients and for different use cases. And among interesting use cases were, for example, that they offer this to restaurants. Yeah, so they could again trace what's happening along with the supply chain. Then they were offering it to ship industries. Yeah. So in any other cases, like where there is kind of a solution, offered to directly to the industry as already made something that they can already take and implement without like bothering about anything else.
Yeah, I don't think any solution is in the stage of just implementing without bothering with anything else. Is not anywhere near plug and play.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you focus on IBM, which is clearly a very important contender in the space and doing some important stuff. I usually am asked this kind of question, like Ethereum versus Hyperledger, and I think it's pretty much the same conversation we had in the 90s, like Linux or Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
So one is very deeply has an open source DNA, open source community. The other is a very enterprise DNA, and so it's not a surprise that IBM, being such a early mover into the space,
Mm-hmm.
is landing a lot of enterprise clients, doing a lot of partnerships, and coming up with very interesting use cases. That shipping case with Maersk is a very interesting one, because it's one of the earliest they did that
Mm-hmm.
really came to the headlights and then was subject to some criticism, which also helps pushing the whole awareness of the solution forward. It's actually going through some issues, because they started it with one player in the space, and now they
Mhm.
want to grab more players in the space. But again, the typical case applies. Like, why should I join something where my competitor
Yeah.
is leading the way? So, which is kind of a typical problem, and typically needs to be rolled out industry-wide, not to one player specifically. Of course, they are doing some interesting things beyond that, as all the companies doing, and also in the open source Ethereum kind of stacks also. I think I've done a lot of work in shipping and logistics in general, as I told, because it's an industry that is now really moving towards and experimenting with the blockchain solutions. And even beyond just the documentary process, actually one thing that is relevant right now, it's kind of a study, actually I think by Maersk. It's required that to ship something from point A to point B, there are like 30 people involved and 200 something lines of communication between those people just to ship something and to deal with the paperwork involved. So of course, logistics has a big problem with documentation management, and that's one of the key angles that blockchain is tackling, and that we have been rolling out at TechHQ several solutions around just that documentary process, which is kind of the low-hanging fruit when we look at a problem. Then there's another very big part of it, which is the actual money moving. Right now, the process is highly centralized in banks, because there are so many parties and they don't trust each other. So banks are like the common party that everyone trusts.
Yeah.
So they own all the money flows, and then money takes like 3 days or 4 or 5 business days to go from point A to point B, and then another 5 to go from B to C. It's highly inefficient. So that's another layer after the documentary processing and management to tackle the money moving, because if you have a token economy, everything can be immediate. Typically not in public ledgers, but in consortium ledgers, it can be immediate, and it can have very, very low fees. So in that sense, it creates an incredibly better experience to all the parties involved, because it's immediate, it has low fees, and the documentary part of it can be much more efficient. So yeah, I think in logistics specifically, this is typically what I need to address.
Okay. And like just to wrap up, what do you think is going to happen next? You mentioned like at least maybe last year and this year, because of all the hype, the industry got interested in blockchain, started to kind of think more seriously about what it can do with it, actually found some application for it. So what's next? Is it standardization, or is it like we are going to have one leader or couple of leaders? So what's happening next?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know the future. I don't.
What needs to happen next?
I think we can forecast a few things with a certain degree of certainty. I think there's two threads that interconnect but are very separated. That's the technical thread, that's the business adoption thread, which go together and one depend on the other, of course. On the technical thread, I forecast that standards will eventually emerge. Right now in public ledgers, during the ICO craze, we had token standards like ERC20 becoming like the adopted norm. In enterprise level solutions, there are no such widely adopted norms. It's very much company by company, industry by industry. So those standards technically will start to appear, and also on a framework and stack level. There will be a lot of tools being built on top of Ethereum, like a lot. Right now, Quorum, Parity are kind of leading the pack, but those will mature, new ones will appear, some will disappear. So there will be a lot of activity there, and I think standards will appear there. I'm kind of bullish on Ethereum for that, actually. Same will happen with Hyperledger, which is actually coming to standards much earlier because it's one company behind it. You can actually argue it's not really decentralized, but that's another conversation. And corporates don't necessarily care about that aspect. So this is on the technical side, it's definitely going for standards. On the business adoption side, right now there's this feeling that, every company is doing something on the blockchain, but odds are that something doesn't really matter. They are not really putting a lot of effort. It's mostly experimentation. It's within some innovation lab, or it's a proof of concept that is internal. So there is not really the belief in society that companies are serious about it. I feel it. I think that will change. Probably in 2019, you will start seeing production level initiatives and results. So companies saying such things as, we are not just experimenting. We rolled out process X. We totally removed what was before, and now it is run on the blockchain, and results are X and Y and Z. So I think these are the two threads. I'm really excited to be a part of it, to be honest. I've been since the space was much less mature, like no development tools existed. It was really kind of a wild west of very promising things, but nothing really being feasible. Now it's definitely feasible, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, technologists, business-minded people are coming to the space and seeing the potential. So I'm very excited about 2019 in the space.
Okay, so probably next year is going to pick up, and we'll see more solutions and more results.
Absolutely, I hope so.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful discussion.
Thank you, Margarita.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.